This is a reading from Akita, The Tears and Message of Mary. A little later, a journalist from the review Catholic Graph asked for an interview. I thought that would offer a good occasion to make the events public. The articles published by the Catholic Graph brought forth numerous reactions. Some were enthusiastic and some hostile, as one can easily imagine. In the first years following the events, there were violent protestations from certain parts, and in particular from a part of the Catholic hierarchy which showed itself openly reticent. Now that the tempest is over and the events have been recognized as supernatural by the ordinary of the diocese, in my soul and in my conscience it appears to me the proper time to reveal these manifest signs of divine providence. That is the reason for this book. The reader may be surprised at the long studies and the suffering which preceded the good news which took place in the month of May 1984, when the events relative to the Virgin of Yuzo Wadai were finally recognized as supernatural by the bishop in a pastoral letter, addressed to all the members of the diocese. That declaration came only many years down a laborious road sowed with multiple complications. In his pastoral letter, following repeated visits to Rome for consultation with the Sacred Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith concerning the events of Yuzo Wadai, Bishop Ito, as bishop of the diocese, solemnly recognized their supernatural character after mature reflection and detailed examination. He certified that the message given by Our Lady of Akita contains no element which might cause harm to the faith of the people of God. As we look back down that laborious road of trial and examination, we marvel now at some of the fantastic objections which were raised, and even more fantastic explanations which were proposed to explain away the tears which flowed from the wooden statue and the blood which flowed from its hand. From the very beginning, the theory of ectoplasm was in the forefront. This theory spread far and wide before the true facts were known, and cast such doubt upon the entire matter that there was indifference to the important message pronounced by Our Lady, messages which are the whole reason for these events of which we speak in this book. In order to overcome this mountain of prejudice, a great deal of patience and confidence in divine providence was necessary. It was only after 10 years that the thesis of the ectoplasm was officially rejected by competent ecclesiastical authority. The theory, according to which the phenomena had a diabolical origin, was rejected by the facts themselves. As the proverb says, one recognizes the truth by its fruits. And how many graces have been obtained by persons who came to honor the Virgin Mary in this place, where she so signally manifested her presence and delivered a message of major importance for the world. How many found the faith again, or were confirmed in the faith, and how many were cured of an incurable malady? There are many examples. In his pastoral letter, the bishop cites the special case of Teresa Chun, a Korean woman who was reduced to a vegetable state as a result of a brain tumor. She was cured miraculously during an apparition of the Virgin of Akita. Another confirming cure is that of the deafness of Sister Agnes, who had been declared incurable. Our Lady herself had announced this cure, which took place in a single instant. All the reasons above contributed to the official declaration by Bishop Ito, which has opened the way to authentic veneration of the Virgin of Akita. May the Lord be blessed for so many benefits, and may our joy and gratitude ever increase. Translators Note. From Father Yasuda's prologue, we learn that this is a book written by an eyewitness. Events attributed to divine providence brought this eyewitness, a sincere priest, to the Yuzo Wadai convent in Akita. Most of what you are about to read was compiled from his news bulletins. We also learned that an ecclesiastical commission found the events to be supernatural, despite a theory of ectoplasm, which for some years was the basis of great opposition, even from members of the Japanese hierarchy. By the time the Bishop of Niigata issued his pastoral letter of approval in 1984, the all-important message was obscured by the disputed signs which accompanied it, signs which had been given by God, as the pastoral states, to confirm the message. Distracting events. Also at Fatima, There were many extraordinary signs and a still undisclosed secret which have tended to distract us from the message. If we ask someone, "Do you know about Our Lady of Fatima?" how often the answer is, "Oh, yes." Is there some kind of secret? Or wasn't there some kind of miracle? Rarely do we meet persons who know the message to which Our Lady of Fatima attached a promise to avoid atomic war and bring an era of peace to mankind. Some of the extraordinary signs Father Yasuda is about to describe in the following pages recall some of the signs seen at Fatima. A globe of light was seen coming from the east and resting above the tree upon which Our Lady appeared to the children. The tree itself, on one occasion, bent down under an unseen weight. Inexplicable sounds were heard. What appeared to be flower petals fell like snow over the area. Finally, at the time and place predicted by Our Lady, a great fire appeared in the sky, like the sun whirling on itself, then plunged towards the earth. Suddenly, the entire area, which had been soaked by a heavy rain, was completely dry. First-person account. One of the special aspects of this book by Father Yasuda is that he himself was actually involved. Our Lady herself was to reveal that she had chosen Father Yasuda for this task. This gives remarkable credibility to all that Father Yasuda says, and fortunately, he not only reports the events, but he frequently interrupts to explain them. When Bishop Ito asked me to translate this book, I was reluctant to do so. I asked the bishop if I might not rather write a book based on Father Yasuda's book and also on other works such as that of Father Shimura, but the bishop replied firmly that before anything else, this book should be made available in its full original form. I soon came to realize the wisdom and importance of this mandate. I recalled that in 1972, the centenary of the apparitions of Our Lady of Pont-Main, the rector of the shrine of Pont-Main gave me the privilege of translating the original account of the apparitions written by a priest within 2 days of their happening. It was the classic, most authentic, and detailed account of the Pont-Main apparitions. It is an even greater privilege to have been given a mandate from Bishop Ito to translate Father Yasuda's book, which is not only the classic and most authentic account of what happened in Akita, but it will probably be to Akita what the memoirs of Sister Lucia are to Fatima. Above, John Haffert with hand on the shoulder of Sister Agnes, standing in front of their convent with the Akita community. I'm guessing that's the author of this book, and you can see him there, the tall man. Chapter 1, Vessel of Suffering. Born prematurely, Sister Agnes Katsuko Sasagawa, called Sister Agnes in the rest of our text, always had a weak constitution. But thanks to the love with which she was surrounded by her family, her personality developed under the best conditions. She suffered her first great trial at the age of 19, when she was struck by a paralysis of the central nervous system following a mistake during an appendectomy. She became immobilized for 16 years, during which she was transferred from hospital to hospital, undergoing one operation after the other. In a clinic in Miyoko, she developed a friendship with a nurse who was a fervent Catholic. Thanks to the devoted care of this nurse, the state of the sick girl improved, and it was here that she took her first steps in the Christian faith. Her heart now awakened to the love of God. She soon felt within herself an ardent desire to become devoted to the service of God and of her neighbor. She wanted to enter a religious community, but her family feared because of her health. After overcoming the reticence of her family, she was admitted to the community of the Sisters of Janshin in Nagasaki. However, 4 months later, she had a relapse and had to be taken back to the clinic of Miyoko. This time, she spent 10 days in a coma, and her condition became critical. She was given some Lourdes water to drink, which had been sent by the Sisters of Nagasaki. Hardly had the water entered her mouth than she regained consciousness, and her frozen limbs regained their mobility. She decided to return to the convent of Our Lady of Janshin after a period of recovery, but the pastor of Takada persuaded her to take care of a newly constructed church in Miyoko. Later, she heard about the Institute of the Handmaids of the Eucharist, a community in which one could live a consecrated life while remaining in society. upon the invitation of Bishop Ito, founder of the Institute. She joined the handmaids, retaining care of the church of Miyoko, which was near the hospital. In addition to caring for the church, she taught catechism. Such, in brief, is the road traveled by Sister Agnes up to the time of her first contact with the community of the Handmaids of the Eucharist. In the first part of her life, with its numerous trials, one can already clearly discern the providential action of God. But since we are concerned especially about the life of Sister Agnes after she entered the community of the Handmaids, we will not return to the past, except as it may bear upon the important matters we have to relate. New trial. After 16 years of physical suffering and repeated hospitalization, who would expect a new and completely different affliction? But towards the end of January of 1973, Sister Agnes began to notice a diminution of hearing in both ears, but she was too taken up by the work of the church to pay much attention to it. However, on Friday, the 16th of March, when she went to answer a telephone call from the mother house of the handmaids, she suddenly realized that she'd completely lost her hearing. She heard the bell, but when she took up the telephone, she found herself plunged into total silence. The pastor found her sitting in the church, stupefied by what had just happened to her. He took her at once to the hospital of Niigata. Dr. Sawada, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, had already cared for her in another hospital some years before, due to a lack of hearing in her left ear. This time, a detailed examination revealed complete deafness of the right ear. The diagnosis was one of evolving and incurable deafness. Sister Agnes at this time was in a state of extreme fatigue. She was immediately hospitalized to follow a treatment and rest cure. Afterwards, she took an intensive course in lip reading in order to regain social contact. She continued with uninterrupted training during the succeeding 43 days until she left the hospital. In her intimate journal, she notes the warnings and counsels of Dr. Sawada. It is very difficult to live in a world without sound. You are fortunate to have faith. I think that will help you. Do not become discouraged. We will take care of all the necessary formalities in order that upon leaving the hospital, you will be able to receive support for the physically handicapped. We will do everything possible to facilitate your social reintegration. She tells with gratitude of the attention and the encouragement of numerous persons during her hospitalization. She was sustained in her efforts to learn lip reading by the devoted personnel and also by the precious cooperation of relatives and close friends. Rather than hastening to say what they wanted to tell her, they took pains to articulate slowly, thus accelerating her progress. She was visited by some 300 friends who had known her at the Church of Miyoko. These visits buoyed her up like rays of sunshine, so necessary in the struggle against depression. During her stay in the hospital, she thought very much, as is quite natural, about what she would do as a deaf person. If she could no longer teach catechism, her family would surely want her to come back to them. But she had chosen to become consecrated to God and desired above all to live only in His service. Might it be permitted to her to offer herself in a life of prayer and penance in the mother house of the Handmaids of the Eucharist? This was her most ardent desire. And now, may I interrupt for a moment to make a personal remark? It was on Friday, the 16th of March, 1973, when Sister Agnes was suddenly and brusquely plunged into a world of total silence. And there is a coincidence in this which is a sign of divine providence. The 16th of March, which marked the beginning of this deafness, which would be miraculously cured on May 30th, 1982, following a promise of the Virgin in her first message, is the vigil of the day when the Catholic Church of Japan commemorates the discovery in 1865 of the descendants of the hidden Christians on the site of Ura in Nagasaki. To the French missionary who arrived there shortly after the reopening of the country, these hidden Christians made themselves known by asking, "Where is the statue of the Virgin?" This is a celebrated fact in the annals of the Church in Japan. Thus the Lord began by submerging His instrument into total silence, with the intention of communicating to the world the message of which we shall soon be speaking. Does not her silence recall the silence of the Japanese Christians of the feudal period? The hidden mission of Sister Agnes began this day, and the cure of her deafness would become a sign of the authenticity of a heavenly message of the Church of Japan and for the world. Does not the Bible offer us analogous examples? The mission of St. John the Baptist, a voice which cries in the wilderness, was prepared by the trial of his father Zachary, who had to remain deaf and dumb for a determined period of time. It is sometimes by means upsetting to man that the all-powerful deploys the force of his arm to reveal his unfathomable designs. The Hill of Hope. Because of her handicap, Sister Agnes's family most definitely wanted her to return home. She showed herself so resolute, however, that her parents and her brother finally gave in. She received a letter from the handmaids of the Eucharist, who proposed that she come to dwell on the hill of Yuzawadai, on the outskirts of Akita. This was also the counsel given by Bishop Ito. Since this was her own most ardent desire, she felt growing in her a new hope. To her great astonishment, the only one who continued to oppose this decision was the beloved nurse who had become her godmother and who had led her to conversion to Catholicism. The nurse argued that she should return to the hospital for a complete recovery. This attitude of a person so dear saddened Sister Agnes, but even the beloved nurse finally gave in before the arguments of her elder brother and her sister-in-law, who had shared her affection and were able to convince her diplomatically. Now the way was finally free. On May 12, 1973, leaving her home, Sister Agnes arrived at the convent in Yuzawadai, accompanied by her sister and her sister-in-law. Welcomed like a member of the family by the 6 religious of the community, Sister Agnes thanked the Lord for the joy and the consolation brought to her by the prospect of a new life, a life in total silence, but a life in total prayer and dedication. However, once she had left home, skepticism rose again among her relatives, who could not decide to send her luggage, thinking from one moment to the other that she would perhaps return. Sister Agnes experienced a similar hesitation, asking her spiritual director if she might not be overestimating herself. The chaplain, who at that time had been directing the little community for 5 years, was very understanding. He assured her that her mission was indeed to remain on the hill with the handmaids. Finally, her affairs had been put in order. After 10 days of waiting, she was installed in her cell, and at that moment she was filled with a great peace. It was as though she had lived there always. Unfortunately, the chaplain who had encouraged her left a short time after her arrival. Sister Agnes was all the more saddened by this, because daily Mass was no longer assured. A mysterious light. The first of the extraordinary events of Akita took place on June 12, 1973, when Sister Agnes was left to watch the house while the other members of the community went to Niigata to take part in a meeting of catechists. The superior had given her permission to open the door of the tabernacle for a time of adoration. On this day, when she was in the chapel, an unusual phenomenon occurred. A brilliant light suddenly appeared as though coming through from the tabernacle. In her intimate journal, Sister Agnes describes in detail this astonishing experience as was requested of her by Bishop Ito. When I approached it to open the door of the tabernacle, as the superiors indicated, an overwhelming unknown light suddenly shone forth. Seized with emotion, I prostrated myself immediately, with my face to the floor. Evidently, I no longer felt the audacity to open the tabernacle. I remained perhaps an hour in this position, subjugated by a power which overwhelmed me. I remained immobile, incapable of raising my head, even after the light had disappeared. When I came back to myself, and I was finally able to reflect on what had happened, I asked myself if Jesus, present in the host, had manifested himself to enlighten my soul in the state of sin, or if I had been simply a victim of hallucination. I had often opened the door of the tabernacle for adoration during the time that I was a catechist in the church in Miyoko, but never had any such thing happened, so it was all the more disquieting for me. Had I perhaps become crazy? I returned to pray in the chapel, but this time nothing happened. Whatever the case, it was an experience so unexpected that I went to bed that night without breathing a word about it to anyone. The following morning, Sister Agnes took advantage of an early awakening to go to the chapel an hour before the others. She was anxious to know if the light of the previous day had been nothing but an illusion of a moment. When, with joined hands, she approached the back of the altar where the tabernacle was, she was again struck by the blinding light. She recoiled instinctively and prostrated herself in adoration. Truly, it was neither an illusion nor a dream. Jesus, present in the host, had truly manifested himself. Now she was sure. After the light disappeared, she remained prostrate. Soon the other sisters arrived for her lauds, but she was still under the effect of this force, which overwhelmed her as she mechanically recited the common prayers. The following Thursday, the 14th of June, while she was praying before the Blessed Sacrament with her companions, Sister Agnes again saw the light flash forth, but this time it was surrounded by a red flame, which seemed to envelop the rays shining from the tabernacle. The extremity of the flame was golden. All the tabernacle appeared in flames. She was overcome and immediately prostrated herself. In her journal, she describes the state of prostration which increased in the course of these 3 extraordinary days. I could not think of anything but to adore and to render thanks before the Blessed Sacrament. When I left the chapel and regained my normal state, I no longer felt that interior sweetness which I cannot find words to explain. Doubts assailed me. Had I lost my head? After some time, it occurred to me that if this was not a mental apparition, perhaps others had seen the same thing. With a lively desire of knowing, I slipped in some words about the unknown light during breakfast. Indeed, no one seemed to be aware of it, and I quickly closed my lips without saying more. The superior remarked, "You are without doubt the only one concerned, so don't speak of it." Taken up short, I simply acquiesced with a nod of the head. This third experience, which took place between 8 and 9:30 in the morning, seemed to have left the strongest impression and the most indelible memory upon Sister Agnes. Her steps led her spontaneously towards the chapel, and her heart overflowed with praises for Jesus, present in the Eucharist. Memory of the mysterious phenomenon revived in her a sentiment of inexpressible happiness, a plenitude of joy, which inflamed her heart with love for God. She herself explains in these simple words, "At the moment when I write these lines, it is the same joy which seized me, an ardent desire for the Lord, which invaded all my being." Meditation. Again, I would like to interrupt to remark that one can say the vision of celestial light appeared like an invitation addressed to Sister Agnes in particular, as following events will confirm. St. Paul, on the road to Damascus, owed his conversion and his mission to the meeting of a brilliant light coming from heaven. When he heard the voice say to him, "Why persecutest thou me?" he fell prostrate with his face against the ground, while his companions were standing about him. This was because Paul must have been the only one to see the influence of the celestial light. The companions of Sister Agnes, who shared the same roof and performed the same spiritual exercises, received absolutely nothing. This was the first invitation to a particular mission, which began then and which was addressed specifically to her. At Fatima, the 3 shepherds were first of all struck with amazement at the sight of a brilliant light. It was the sign of the approaching visit of the Virgin. Likewise, the light which overwhelmed Sister Agnes seemed like a preparation for the great message which was about to be confided to her by the Mother of God. The mysterious light from the Blessed Sacrament reveals the very nature of Jesus, who says, "I am the light of the world." As we shall learn later, the miraculous cure of the deafness of Sister Agnes, promised by Our Lady as a sign of the authenticity of the events, took place during benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. Thus, the meeting with the light also takes on, for Sister Agnes, a prophetic value. Translators Note. The light at Fatima, which preceded the apparition of Our Lady, so distracted the children that they were still wondering about the brilliance of the light when they noticed Our Lady in its midst. She asked if they would be willing to accept whatever God would send them and offer it up for the conversion of sinners and in reparation for sin. When the children replied that they would, Our Lady opened her hands, and rays of that intense light suddenly streamed from her heart, causing the children to feel lost in God and to exclaim, "Oh, most holy Trinity, I adore thee. My God, I love thee in the most blessed sacrament." When Bishop Ito was asked, "What is the message of Our Lady of Akita?" he answered simply, "It is the message of Our Lady of Fatima." And there is a remarkable similarity between the light of the Eucharist seen at Fatima, shining from the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and the light from the tabernacle, announcing to Sister Agnes in a way she could not yet fully understand, that as Our Lady had revealed the most important message at Fatima, so now that message was to be reaffirmed at Akita through this humble handmaid of the Eucharist.